All right. So to start, if I can get you just to state your name, rank and serial number, and where you live.
Okay, my name is, ready?
Yep.
My name is Arthur Seltzer, and I live at 1920 Frontage Road, Building 2 of the Grand Apartments. I'm a World War II veteran, and I served overseas during the war, which I'll tell you about.
Okay, do you want to start telling us your pre-war history, where you're from, and how you got into the service?
I graduated from Olney High School in 1942, and I was at the University of Pittsburgh. I had spent 1 year when I was drafted into the Army in February of 1943. I took my basic training with the 99th Infantry Division in Camp Van Dorn, Mississippi. After I took my basic training, I was sent to a school in Baltimore, Maryland, where I learned to operate a radio, which at that time was all new, which was telephone, teletype, and pictures without wire. And you know what we have now, we have cell phones. I was then sent back to the 99th Signal Company of the 99th Infantry Division, and upon arriving there I spent a couple of days, and then I was transferred to Camp Polk, Louisiana, and I was assigned to the 4th Armored Signal Battalion, and that's the unit I went overseas with. I went overseas on March the 31st, 1944, and I went over on the Queen Elizabeth. Crossed the Atlantic in 5 days. We landed in Glasgow, Scotland, boarded trains, and went down from Glasgow, Scotland into England. I was stationed at a little town in England where we still took our basic training, and also where we were issued all the equipment for the invasion of France, which naturally was going to be called D-Day. And there's where I received my vehicle loaded with all my radio equipment that I learned to operate when I went to school. We arrived in Portsmouth on June the 1st, 1944. And naturally, the D-Day was supposed to be on June the 5th, but due to weather conditions, rain and so forth, they postponed it, and finally General Eisenhower made the decision he could not wait any longer, and we went on June the 6th. I was assigned at that time to the 29th Infantry Division. All the people who were in the 4th Armored were all specialists. We did not operate as a signal battalion. We were assigned to various units who needed our various specialties that we all had. As I said before, I was attached to the 29th Infantry Division, which was going to land on Omaha Beach in the second wave.
So did the guys that you were going in with, did you know them?
I didn't know any of them. The gentlemen from the 29th Infantry Division naturally knew each other. They took all the training together. But I was assigned to them. I was assigned to the 29th, to this group, and the gentleman asked me if I had ever gone over a side of a ship before, and I said no. And he said, well, tomorrow we're having training, to go over the side of the ship so you'll know what to do. He says, you were issued your radio. I said, well, no, my equipment is in a trailer attached to my half track. That's not here yet. I don't know where it's at. I said, but I was given a radio that I'm to carry, which weighs about 65 pounds. He says, well, that's what you're going to use all the time for communication purposes. I said, I know that. I says, I also have my pack of equipment, which we were all given a week's supply of K-rations, and we had extra clothes, not shirts and socks, no shoes. We had our own boots, and that weighed about 45 pounds. So between the radio and that, I was pretty well weighed down with equipment.
Were you armed?
I carried a carbine for the time being until I finally got my Luger, which I'll show you later. Again, next morning we're out and we went over the side, which was supposed to be a ship, giving us an idea of what it was going to be like coming down. We then were all stationed and we all sat together, and as I said, we were there from June the 1st, and each day we thought we were going and nothing happened. Finally, on the eve of June the 5th, we got the word that the D-Day was on. And at that time, as I said, we were on our ships already, and we took off early that morning. And I'm talking about early, we took off about 3 o'clock in the morning from Portsmouth.
In what kind of a ship?
We were on a big transport, and all the troops were on this thing. We got about 3/4 of the way there when we were given the signal to get ready to go over the side of the ship into the landing crafts. A landing craft holds 36 men, and the landing craft I was assigned to was this sergeant that I had met and his group, and we went over the side of the ship. But before we did that, he came over to me and he said to me, Arthur, he says, all my men had signed a dollar bill. This is the dollar bill that we signed, and you can see it's the original.
Oh, you've got it up there.
That's the original.
Upside down.
On that bill was all the names of the gentlemen that were going to be in our landing craft, which were 36 men. So if you take down the original bill up there, you will be able to read 36 names.
I'll get a photograph of that before I leave.
I can take it down if you want to.
We'll do that a little later.
I usually use that when I go to school because I don't want to lose that.
No.
Here's a better copy of it, by the way, if you want to take a look. Here's a better copy of it.
Let's see if I can squeeze that in here. I think you can get a good idea and see the signatures.
We went over the side of the ship and into the landing craft, and we were explained that we were in the second wave. The first wave that hit Omaha Beach, 70 to 80 to 90% were either wounded or killed. And the machine gun bullets on the beach were unbelievable. And the shells coming down from the top of the buff, we call it a buff, but it was a big mountain, which was about, I guess it was from my back room all the way up to the kitchen. That's how far it was we were off the beach. When I get the call before our ship got up to the beach, and we were told not to go out the front, the gangplank of the landing craft, to go over the side of the ship, we will have a better chance of surviving. And I gave the instructions to the commander in charge, who was in my landing craft, and he naturally not told all his men what to do. We hit the beach and over the side of the ship, but we were pretty far out. The guy who was driving the landing craft dropped us too far out, and the water was over our head, and with all the equipment, down I went. I had a radio and all this equipment. I had to make a decision, and I dropped my pack with my K rations and my clothes. I figured I can always get another one of those by minute, and I get another radio. And I came back up, and I found out that I wasn't the only one that couldn't swim too well, and we all worked our way into the beach. We were on that beach, which probably was the longest day of my life. And if you saw the movie Saving Private Ryan, you cannot get a better idea of what that landing was like than Saving Private Ryan. Also, there was no way to get off the beach because of the buff, and we had to cut a hole in the buff, and there's no way we could do it because in the first wave, almost all the engineers that were in that group were killed. Finally, I contacted the battleship that we were on and told them that if you don't start shooting at the buff and open up, we'll never get off this beach.
So how did you contact the ship?
By my radio.
Oh, you still had the radio?
Oh yeah,
when it
I
worked?
came up, and oh yeah, it was waterproof. And that's why that was where I kept, and my food and all was down at the bottom. So the commanding officer of the 29th came over to me and he told me to contact the battleship. I said, I've already contacted them. I have told them that if they don't shoot into that buff and open up, we'll never get off this beach.
So at the time, you're on the beach,
We're
in
on
the
the
sand. What are you using for cover?
Dead bodies. We made sure that the ones that were wounded and could get off, we were putting them back on landing crafts to go back to the ship. But the ones that were dead, we laid there, and they're the ones we hid behind. We figured that there's not much more we can do, and we needed cover. Most of us could not find anybody, and we just dug as much as we could into the sand to get down as deep as we could. And it's pretty hard trying to dig in wet sand, because in the morning the tide's all the way up to the buff, and as the day comes on, the tide works its way back out again. Now we landed at 6:05 in the morning when our landing craft hit that beach, and at that time the tide was pretty well off the beach already. After the battleship started to hit that buff and finally blew a hole in it. If you saw the movie Saving Private Ryan, naturally they show it that it was done by a couple guys who he made them sergeants right away, and in that movie they show that they blew it up, but it was actually the battleship that blew a hole in the buff. Again, we were on that beach, and finally it was about 6 o'clock that evening when we finally started to move off the beach.
Wow. So were you facing pillboxes on the beach?
We were facing, my wife and I went back to retrace my steps 3 years ago. From Cherbourg all the way up to Bastogne, not Bastogne, but from along the coast where all the machine guns, they build a road there. There's a road now. And that's where all the machine guns were. And then going from the road up is the buff. And you can still see there's still guns up there. They preserve some of the guns that are in the holes up on the top of the buff. These are the ones that were firing directly down at the beach with their 88 shells.
So they were not in concrete pillboxes.
No.
They were.
No, that was, well, they were built, some of them were built that they, in fact, when you go back, a couple of them that they have now for samples show that there was a concrete in them, but a lot of them didn't have these. So they would dig a hole in the sand, dig it out, and then they put the cement in, and it became where they put their big guns at. Now some of them, most of them had that, but a lot of them only had the dirt. We finally got off that beach, as I said, about 6:30 that night, and at that time we started our forward march, and the first town we came to was St. Petersburg. Hold on, let me get my paper. I can't remember all this stuff. St. Lo. St. Lo was leveled to the ground. And what happened was, one day we owned it, one day the Germans owned it. It was there that our Air Force dropped some bombs and killed 36 of our own men, because when they dropped the bombs, they were not aware at that time we owned St. Lo. And we killed 36 men from the 30th Infantry Division. And it was the first time that our own army killed some of our own men.
So during that first couple days, did you see any of the enemy?
Oh yes, oh yeah, in St. Lo.
In St. Lo?
Yeah.
And were you armed at that point?
Yeah, I had my carbine and so forth. The next place we went, after we broke out of St. Lo, we worked our way up to the Battle of the Bulge. Now, the Battle of the Bulge, Bastogne is up at the top of a mountain, and that's where the 101st Airborne was surrounded by the Germans. If you remember, the Germans gave the commanding officer, which is Winters, who's a very good friend of mine, and I have a letter from Winters, if you want to take a look at it. He wrote me a letter. And he wrote a note back to the Germans, and he said to them, nuts. And the Germans could not understand what nuts meant at that time. I was attached at that time to the 20th Armored Division. And we were in the Ardennes Forest, which is in the bottom of Bastogne. And it's surrounded by nothing but trees. And the 88s that landed in the forest, the pieces of wood from the tree would fly off and go into your body. And that was worse than the bullets going in. Finally, after a while, we were able to finally take Bastogne. And again, it was unbelievable from there on out. After the Battle of the Bulge, while I was in the Battle of the Bulge, by the way, an 88 landed quite a little distance from me and threw me up into the air, and I came down and landed on my back, and I could not hear. And the medics came running to me, and he was saying something I couldn't hear at all what he was saying, and I kept on pointing to my ears. He finally said to me, I couldn't hear what he was saying, but I got the impression they wanted to take me to the first aid station. Well, I had to operate this radio and all this equipment, and I kept on telling them, no, no, no. All of a sudden, after about an hour or more, I got a ringing, and my hearing finally came back. Thank God.
So during the Bulge, just one quick question.
Sure.
It was cold.
Well, that's what I'm going to tell you.
Oh,
it was
okay.
winter time when we hit the Bulge. We had not received our winter equipment.
That was my question.
So we didn't have no heavy coats. We only had our combat boots. We didn't have no rubbers, put on over the boots. And it was snowing pretty hard. It was snowing pretty hard. and there was not much we could do about it, and we all tried to huddle together to stay as warm as we could.
And you're sleeping in foxholes?
We were sleeping in foxholes. When I went back with my wife to retrace my steps, I went back with Steve Ambrose's Historical Tours out of New Orleans. They run all the trips for the veterans who were in combat. And when we got to Bastogne, they didn't know what to do for us. They wanted to buy us drinks and everything because we had liberated them from the Germans. And again, I showed my wife the woods where I was, and I have some pictures which I took. I can't show them to you because they're on a disc. And I show them to the kids in school when I go to the schools. Anyway, when you go up to Bastogne now, and you go up to the stores, it is loaded with all kinds of nuts. Because that's what he told the Germans, nuts.
That's pretty funny.
After Bastogne, we pushed on, and we crossed the Rhine River, and we crossed the Rhine River in gliders. I was attached to the 101st Airborne, which is the one with the claw up there. These are all the units I was attached to during the war. The first one on the right is the 99th Infantry Division that I took my basic training with. The airborne with the claw was the 101st, which I crossed the Rhine River with. The 20th Infantry, 20th Armored Division, was the one that we were in Bastogne and the Bulge with. And I don't think I have a picture of the 40th Infantry. No, I don't have a 40th Armored Division is the one that I was with when we liberated Dachau Concentration Camp.
How about when you landed? What division were you with?
I was with the 29th Infantry Division and the 29th, I believe, here's the 29th again. The blue and the white is the 29th Infantry Division. The 100th Infantry Division is the one I came home with. The 20th, I told you, armored was, I don't have, up there where you see the red and blue, that I believe was part of the 40th Armored Division. I think it was, I'm not positive. Again, as I said,
You know what? Let's take